Hello and welcome to Patched. I'm your host Paul James. Today I'm joined by a special guest because Matto wasn't quite into this topic and has decided to sit down and read a book. Stephen Del Prado, how are you, Matt?
I'm pretty good. It's a shame, Matto. I mean, I can't totally blame you. I've fallen off the Final Fantasy wagon myself a few times, but
This is one
I
you can get
like to
yourself up
think
for, though.
I can a little bit. And there's some interesting things happening in the Final Fantasy sphere. Certainly more interesting than the Kingdom Hearts sphere.
Oh, yeah, let's not go there. Nomura can go, light that on fire and torch it up. I don't care, but don't screw up with don't screw 7, 16, anything else that's going on here. Or that 9 remake that we know is bubbling along. Then the Nvidia leak has revealed it. Like, just get it out there for us.
As long as the 8 remake gets made as well. I'm an 8 apologist, so
Yeah, okay, I'll let you off. Because you're doing me a favour coming on the show to talk about Final Fantasy VII. The reason we're doing it is, as I'm sure lots of people know at this point, is that we just had a big Final Fantasy VII 25th anniversary event where we saw 4 different titles, 2 that we're really going to focus our time on. I'll just quickly shout out the fact that Final Fantasy VII, the First Soldier, which is the Battle Royale title, was shown. It's already out. There's apparently a 3rd season. It's been out that long. I wasn't even aware of that. I don't know about you, but... you didn't even realize mobile games were there. You picked and chose when you were.
I'm so not into those things. Like it's just not up my alley, and it feels really weird. I guess maybe there's a segment of the Final Fantasy market there that is into it, but
it's the same 10
I don't
people
know.
in every battle royale match.
I don't know how much the kids are into Final Fantasy these days. I don't know if it's sort of like a yesteryear brand for them.
Well, actually, I mean, we're both teachers. Do you see or hear kids talking about it at all? Like some of that anecdotal stuff. Obviously, it's a very small sphere for both of us. But
I do have a few students who are into it. So if I wear I'm wearing a Final Fantasy 12 shirt at the moment to be thematic with my bluey pajama pants. But
very nice.
None
of which anyone can see, but that's all right.
No, I know you're all very disappointed about that. But very like a few of them will recognize it, but they're very much the very into gaming.
Yeah.
Video game kids and even to them it's not fresh. They consider it all pretty retro.
Turds. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of too many that would really there's a couple kids along the way, and you get the kids that always ask because they know I'm kind of the video game guy. Like, what's your favorite game? Final Fantasy IX? What? From 90% of them, and then there's 10% that go, yeah, that's old. I go, yeah, it came out before 2000.
Well, even if you
weren't
said
alive.
Final Fantasy 15, they'd be like, oh, that's old. I'm like, well, yeah, it is old. It's 7 years old now or something.
Yeah, 2015. Yeah, so going on 7 years old sometime this year. Holy shit! What?
Yeah.
Oh,
and remake, and even then, it's like, oh, that's the remake of that really old game.
really old game that my dad talks about sometimes.
When I was your age.
Oh shit, we're getting old. But yeah, we're gonna hone in on the rest of it. So yeah, there was First Soldier, Ever Crisis, which is an interesting mobile title. It's going into beta later this year. That kind of is a remake of 7, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, a whole bunch of stuff there that I don't know. There's a beta later in the year. We'll see what happens. They might pocket edition it and put it on consoles later on. But nothing too much for either of us to say on the mobile side. We're going to focus on the 2 big announcements and then just kind of see where the conversation takes us in regards to the future of Final Fantasy from there, or Final Fantasy VII from there. So we'll start, I guess, in the order that these things were revealed. We had a conversation pre-show, and we're probably going to replicate parts of it here. Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, or Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, I should say, is getting a remake. Looks like just a straight-up, full-blown remake. System's the same, everything's the same outside of a visual glow-up. But what did you make of what we saw?
I mean, I think it's something that's been a long time coming. People have been clamoring for this for quite a while, and it famously was never made available outside of the physical release of the original game on UMD. Obviously, if you had some custom firmware cracking on your Vita or your PSP, it was very, very easy to obtain. I still have a physical copy of it somewhere in the house, but
it's too far away.
basically, I do wonder if that didn't lend to its legend somewhat, that it was never released digitally for the PSP, or maybe for the original. Was it released digitally for? No, it mustn't have been.
No,
done
it didn't come
PSP.
out on the PSP Go, because otherwise that would have allowed it to be on the
Yeah,
Vita.
okay. Because
That's the whole thing. It was physical
I
UMD,
do
and that's
have
it.
I do have it on my Go at the moment, which tells you everything you need to know about the legality of my PSP Go. But
That's right. You and how many units they sell? Like 70 million. So you and about 69 million others.
yeah,
Nice.
thereabouts. Not quite as bad as the Dreamcast, but pretty up there.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great handheld title, and as you said, it looks like it's pretty faithful to it outside of the visual glow up, which I have to presume they're just probably downscaling some Final Fantasy VII remake assets
Yeah.
and tossing that all of tossing all of that in there. But my main concern, which we did cover briefly earlier, is that the systems for that game, the way it plays, is very much of that era. Like it's a handheld title and you play in 20 to 30-minute bursts. You finish a mission or two, and then you get off your bus and you go about your day and do whatever you're doing, and then you pick it up again later. And I don't know unless they do some significant changes to it that it would really fly for me on any platform outside of maybe the Vita or
A handheld of some
a
sort.
Vita 2 if Sony had actually listened to us. No, the outside, the Switch or a Steam Deck or
Or
if it's on
mobile.
Xbox and if you can get it to mobile or run it from your Xbox to your phone or
Yeah.
all the other fancy stuff Microsoft's doing these days. So
Yeah,
I think
your
it's going
main
to be a
focus
little
being
bit
that,
like
yeah, kind
that.
of bite-sized, in and out sort of. Because you can replicate that on the console, but it's not really what the console experience is. The console experience mostly is designed for larger sessions, and to kind of fire it up for a 20-minute, 30-minute burst is not really what they're trying to get you to do when you find yourself on the couch with the PS5 DualSense in hand.
No, I guess quick resume and all of those sorts of things will mitigate that slightly in that this is, the first generation of consoles where you can basically be into the game in under a minute if you're lucky enough,
Yeah.
uh, as opposed to prior generations. So it could work slightly better in that, like just a little palate cleanser. Oh, I don't have much time to play. I don't want to start a big game. I'll smash out a mission or two in that. But it's for me, it's still the kind of thing I would rather play in bed. Maybe I can remote play to the Vita still from the PS5.
Yes. I just don't know if the
Mm. Yeah, how
like.
they would
I
hold
remember,
up.
I haven't even considered the idea of remote playing to my Vita. Um, since getting the PS5, but I certainly remember on most PS4 games they would have the remote play compatible with the Vita kind of stamped on the box.
I
Don't know
played
if
a
that's the
chunk
case
of
anymore, but I
I
mean you
played a
can still
chunk
remote
of
play. You can
Destiny
remote play
remote
to a
playing to the Vita.
yeah. I
That was
mean
interesting.
I remote play to my phone somewhat regularly.
Yeah,
And I just
that
got
might be the way
I
to go.
don't have one here, but like I've got the little controller mount.
The shell, yeah,
It's currently on my. I don't have one for my Dual Sense. I've got one for the DualShock 4. So
yeah.
but that's fine because you're Bluetoothing it to your phone, so it doesn't matter which. Like I could do it with my Xbox and play a PS5 game that way. It wouldn't matter. Up to a point, I guess. There's the touchpad compatibility. Let's
And of
avoid
course,
that. But
yeah,
yeah. There's
and of
like
course, the
those
price.
options are there.
I think they need to keep it in the realms of realistic. I would probably not go for this if it's any more than 29.95 AU. I think they need to bang it out at 20 to 30 bucks. Of
I
course, being
don't see
being
it being it.
Square, I don't know. They'll push for like 40 or 50 or even
I reckon they'll
60,
squeeze 60. Yeah.
which is I think you're going to see a lot of people waiting for a sale if they do that. Unless it's, maybe it's like 49 at retail or something like that, and maybe then people will bite. But just for me personally, because again, it's if it's nothing aside from the visual upgrade, I honestly feel like the game will play just as well on my PSP Go.
Yeah. No, I mean that's totally fair. Like I guess for me, I never had that. I guess attempted experience of just sitting down and binging it at home. I still recall quite vividly, actually, to this day, the nature of my experience with that was because it was 2008 thereabouts.
Would have
Like
been
that
earlier than
was
that, I would think.
was it?
2006 or 7, I would put it at it. 8 feels a little bit late.
I mean, I'll have to double check it now while we're chatting. But I feel like I vividly remember playing it on the train heading back and forth to Bendigo for uni, which was always an hour long trip, or give or take. So that kind of, I mean, it was not quite the hour sort of thing that you were talking about, but it's fairly representative of that sort of experience you were having before. And I've never experienced the game in any other way, so I'm wondering if
Yeah.
that maybe colours my like I still adore the game in every single way, and would just I'll throw my $60 at it straight away because that's how I feel about that particular game. Let
Yeah,
alone
for sure.
the way I typically am when it comes to games anyway. But
It does sound like you
it's,
probably played it under optimal conditions, though, like as it was
yeah,
designed to. Because I think what a lot of people forget is that that whole generation of gaming, some of the biggest titles on the PSP, Monster Hunter, all those were designed around, transit gaming. Like you would be playing these on your portable on the train for the 20 to 40 to 60 minutes it took you to get to and from work or school or whatever. And they were, the more successful games were designed around that. Even some stuff on the Vita to a point.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what was the other big Monster Hunter like thing that PlayStation put out? Oh, Freedom Wars on the Vita, for example, fits that bill. Yeah, I mean, look, that's kind of the nature of any sort of portable experience. Typically, you can even see hints of it in kind of what Nintendo has gone for with a lot of their Switch titles these days, kind of knowing that they are handheld games as well. I mean, Mario, the 3D Mario's have always kind of been a little bit bite-sized anyway, because you can go and chase that star and be done if that's what you want to do. Breath of the Wild kind of has that because it's just so much more exploration focused and just get out there and discover. You can go off and discover for whatever period of time you like, and then just switch it off or put it in rest mode and move on with your day. Monster Hunter obviously fits that bill as you're talking about. Crisis Core did, and yeah, I'll be very interested to see whether translates.
Whether it translates.
So, and finally, Google is playing nice with me, and it came out September 13, 2007. So it was actually my first year of uni, I guess. But yeah, I spent a lot of time playing that on the train. But, yeah, it'll be interesting actually. Like I come in with kind of stars in my eyes right now, but I wonder whether it'll lose that sheen if that experience doesn't translate overly well. I guess in my eyes, because you've obviously had that opportunity to sit there and kind of, I guess, play in a longer session. It's not quite stuck in the same way. But yeah, I wonder whether it'll lose that kind of little bit of shine in my eyes when that chance comes along. Thanks for ruining it, Stephen.
I mean, again, like I said though, it could end up really well in that you and I are sort of in a similar phase of our lives with young children and jobs that take up a lot of our time, and gaming
We
time is
might
at
play
a
it that way
premium.
anyway.
And it might end up being something where you're quite happy to smash out 30 to 40 minutes rather than another title where generally I feel like a lot of games don't tend to give you any sense of satisfaction until you've put 2 to 3 hours in them.
Yep.
Like, larger titles, an hour feels like, well, I've basically got nothing done and now I just have to stop.
Yeah, because that gameplay loop is longer. It
Mm,
takes longer to kind of go through that entire cycle, and so yeah, unless you're willing to sit the whole thing out, then you're not going to get what you want out of it probably. But yeah, like, whereas I guess Crisis Core does fit that bill. So yeah, who knows? I guess it depends on how we'll be playing the game when it comes out. Supposedly I guess it translates to this summer for us, which could, I mean, that's such an awkward window to declare, because that could be December 2022 or it could be January Feb 2023 for all we know. We'll just wait and see what happens there. Got a
yeah,
gut feel?
I have to feel they probably want it out by October, November.
Yeah, I feel. I mean, obviously October, November doesn't fit the window that they defined, but at the same time, I do feel like that 2022 side of the line is surely what they're aiming for, because, I mean, about to pair in our conversation about Remake Part 2 or Rebirth as we now know it.
That's going to be very interesting when we get to that. Yes,
There's a lot of Final Fantasy coming down the pipeline right now, like big Final Fantasy stuff from Crisis Core Remake to 16, which is meant to drop in our winter. So, we're looking at kind of June, July potentially for that one.
not be surprised if that gets pushed.
I see. I don't reckon that one will slide any further. I mean, just based on kind of the messaging around it, it sounds like it's done and it's polished, which is the same messaging that Starfield's getting, only we're getting even longer up our sleeve for 16. I reckon whenever they come out and announce a date, especially kind of in light of what happened with 15, where they had a giant event, Greg Miller and Tim Geddes hosting, and there was glitz and glamour and stuff everywhere, and then the date didn't stick. They pushed it back. I don't think they'll be looking to do anything like that again. So not just the event, but also the shifting date. I think we're just holding off at this point to slot that in there. But yeah, you add that in there. There's still the Nvidia leak that shows Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy Tactics are getting remakes. I'll save my Final Fantasy IX stuff for another time, because that could be a whole episode in and of itself. And then of course there's Rebirth to talk about as well. So that's probably the perfect segue. What did you make of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or Remake Part 2 for anyone unaware?
Well, I think the first interesting thing is that
I
I
guess what did
think
you expect potentially even beforehand? Like knowing that this event was coming, did you have any expectations?
I had some suspicions, and they were sort of partially confirmed by what I am going to assume is now the canonical name of Part One, which is Intergrade. And I think they dropped the Part One aspect for a few very important reasons, in that simply naming it Final Fantasy VII Remake Part One and then Part Two set up some expectations, and I think it was good for them to do that at that time when we thought we were getting a straight remake of this game.
Yeah,
And then, of course, spoiler alert for those who haven't finished a game that's been out for a
this is
few
your warning.
years and is only 30 hours long. So skip ahead a few minutes if you want. But it becomes very clear by the end of that game that we are not getting a straight remake of Final Fantasy VII in the way that most people imagined. And I do not think we're ever going to see discs two and three in the way that we would
No,
imagine,
absolutely not.
because the resources required for it would simply be ridiculous. I think it's unrealistic in retrospect to think that Square are going to be able to take a game of that size and push it to PS5 expectations and not have to do some weird stuff with the map to get around just the scope of that world and
Yeah, just
how
squash it,
sparse
or it
it
becomes ultra linear. It
yeah,
just becomes Final Fantasy 10
yeah, and how sparse it really would
or
be
13.
without building it out.
Yeah,
And I think it's that's why they've gone with Integrate and Rebirth to really drive home the fact that this is not Final Fantasy VII Remake in, what we would necessarily expect that to be. Not in the same way that The Last of Us Remake is going to be, you know,
rebranded as Part 1. Yeah,
yeah, and rebranded as Part One to obviously tie in with Part Two. And I think it's, a case here of it's just resetting expectations. I did have to go back and watch the new end sequence for Intergrade, which I hadn't
yep.
seen because I didn't bother paying for Intergrade, and watching the trailer for
I guess I'll
Rebirth.
just quickly shout that out. That was like that Yuffie DLC or expansion is genuinely fantastic. So if you do get an opportunity, if it's dirt cheap or whatever, pick it
Oh
up, man,
yeah,
and give
well,
it a go. You'll love it.
if I can catch it on a sale, I'll probably have a crack at it. Um, but it's I think from what they showed in the trailer for Rebirth, it's pretty obviously not discs two and three.
Yeah,
It's a completely different beast, and
we'll visit
uh,
key locations when kind of
yeah,
key points of conflict are going on, but the way those things play out will be very different. I mean, you see kind of in that trailer, Cloud and Sephiroth walking along, towards a bridge there, and you go, okay, that could be around the Nibelheim area. Like that could be a flashback of some sort. Maybe, maybe not. There's obviously, I mean, it's hard because like even the perspective is very different to what we saw, and the graphics themselves obviously have come a mile. So how they envisage this location looking in 2022, 3, 4, whatever, whenever it ultimately comes out, is obviously very, very different to what they had in mind back in the 90s. But like yeah, I can just as easily see lots of those moments kind of being revisited. Even the trailer when they talk about, like, you hear Aerith talking about how, referencing the fact that she was supposed to die. So maybe, and them just kind of teasing and pump faking fans. Like maybe we have a moment where sorry, more spoilers for people for not the 2020 remake, but the core game, like Aerith getting skewered. Like maybe we have a near miss, which would be, I don't know, that I feel like that'd be not overly satisfying.
I
If
I
they
don't
if
know
they
if they'll
kind of
even,
lower her and she gets knocked out of the way or something and it doesn't happen, but
I don't know if they'll even keep it that faithful. Like that's sort of the vibes I'm getting. Is
I could see that being because of the moment that is. As I knock my mic, I could see that particular moment maybe, and probably only one or two others, being the sort of things that they might try and implement or integrate
yeah.
into it somehow, but then change them.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of the first game sort of did was, meet a lot of expectations, then subvert a lot of them towards the end. And I think part two is them just leaning into full subversion.
Yeah, yeah. No, whatever you got in mind, throw it away. Like, you know, I don't even know if if you're the core team and there is the idea like, okay, we'll visit a few of these key locations that we love or think are going to be kind of integral to the plot we're trying to spin. Like how you determine what those are. Like Cosmo Canyon is beautiful, and obviously the soundtrack is phenomenal. So you'd like as a fan, I'd love to see him go there. Hell, I'd even like to hear when you kind of climbing up through Midgar there and you hear the march. Oh no, it wasn't Midgar. Where was the march? You know the theme though, the musical theme that I'm talking about.
Oh, some of those songs are just burned into my brain, but I wouldn't be able to tell you the names of them. But the minute I hear them,
Yeah, you pick it straight away, and it's going completely blank on me right now. But yeah, like you could almost see like there's a few of those like how do we bring these in, even if it's just the musical side, like how do we blend that in there, and is this iconic track that we want to rework, remaster, revitalize, how can we bring that in here without forcing us to have to replicate the whole scenario again, and again maybe play it out a different way. Like I think there's going to be a lot of those sort of questions that'll go on, and then where's the line? Because if we start going, oh, but we love this and we love this and we love this, and you go, well, maybe we should have just remade the whole game, which to your point isn't a very feasible one. Like the amount that we kind of cover in Disc 2 was not something they could replicate here in the space of time that they've got between releases.
no,
So
it's just again the expectations like you couldn't have that much of an empty open world right now. Like
yeah,
it would end up feeling like you said Final Fantasy X, where we're just running around on a map to get to the next location. Like it worked back on the PlayStation 1, and I don't think it would work right now.
well, even 10, a bit like 13, like people kind of I think lose sight of this with 10 a little bit. Like 10 was ultra linear until you get to the Calmlands, and it's a very small, ultimately open area that you can kind of waltz around in, but it's still only got one point of entry, one point of exit. Like like it's kind of
Yeah,
the wide linear bit that you've got in that particular segment there. Like 10 is just as, if not more so, linear than Final Fantasy 13. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try and say that 13 is a better game than 10, but like we kind of lose sight of that a little bit, I think.
yeah. It's kind of the funny thing that what constituted an open world in the PlayStation 1 generation is very different to what constitutes an open world in current generations.
Yeah,
And I'm
and what
I'm
holds up.
quite happy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm quite happy for them to change everything. I can
agreed.
go back and replay that game. It doesn't cease existing because this version's out. Does it look as pretty? No, but I can imagine that
Well, that's
maybe
where Ever
after all
Crisis
the
might come in anyway. That might be
and
where
that
Ever Crisis is perfect for that.
yeah, and if the dust settles on this remake, maybe they do a slightly, more faithful adherence to it using some of these assets. And, it won't be the level of fidelity and everything we'd expect, but I think people could probably dig a more, maybe PS3 to PS4 level
Yeah,
looking Final Fantasy VII that was a little bit more of a faithful remake using some of these assets.
yeah, yeah. I can see that. And yeah, certainly interesting. I guess so. We've kind of touched on the narrative stuff. We do see, well, we see UI from gameplay. I don't know that
Hmm.
we're not looking at anything overly poignant when it came to what we saw in that respect. But
No, they
what
were
are you
pretty
thinking?
judicious in what they showed. And
As they should be.
yeah, it doesn't give us a lot to go off, and obviously tying in with the additional ending sequences in Intergrade. So some of the stuff with Zack going back to the church, and it's a
Is
bit of
she
a
there?
mystery
Is she
box.
not? What's happened? Sort of.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we've got some Westworld stuff going on where it's like, is it the different timeline, same timeline? They're just playing with the audience a little bit, and you know, are we across, multiverses at this point? How is it all going to come
I mean,
together?
it's such a Nomura sort of idea. I do worry
And I
that
mean,
with him at the helm, I guess he's not actually at the helm with this one. He's already in pre-pro on the third, but he's obviously got his fingers all over what's going on. Like he'll be
yeah,
in regular
and
contact, you'd imagine. I worry that they try to do too much and consequently fly a little too close to the sun.
and I think what they're probably aiming for is to keep these around a 30 to 40 hour experience as well,
Yeah, yeah, more accessible in that
which
respect.
well, and it vastly improves replayability. Like I I can replay a 30-hour game. I have very little desire to replay a 70 to 80-hour game.
Well, I mean, you think about what Square themselves and other kind of publishers have PS1 era JRPGs have done. They're all putting these games back out, and they've got these. You can turn the combat off, or you can, turn random encounters off. You can boost yourself to level 99 and basically just do 10,000 damage with every hit, or you've got these fast forward modes, all these sort of things. Like, they recognize that duration doesn't fly anymore. It would be interesting to see what happens with 16 as a result, actually, for that matter. But,
Yeah, and obviously we've got some other like Falcom and the Persona 5 Atlas developers are still
yep,
pushing those game
100.
length limits as far as they can. But even, I mean, I guess the problem with Atlas is that even playing on easy, Persona 5 Royal is going to take you in excess of 100 hours to finish.
Yep.
So
Good luck
we'll
with that.
see. Yeah,
Enjoy, Xbox owners.
yeah, you'll never see it coming. And I really feel like if they rein it in a little bit, it's probably a good thing for them as well. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where they can't, get one of these out every 2 to 3 years. We've
Yeah.
already seen, a lot of other developers who been a little bit overly ambitious, and it's made things a little bit more difficult for them going forward.
Yeah. And obviously there was a layer of a pandemic in there that wasn't forecast, but you're right. Like, they obviously would know better at this point. They launched part one amidst the beginning of the pandemic, and have spent the majority of the development time to this period working with a pandemic looming over them. So all those other variables, they should be across that, and they kind of know what the constraints are of what they're trying to make, and the constraints are on the development side. Hopefully they don't try to bite off too much in that respect as a result.
Do you think we'll get an Integrate like update to Rebirth?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
And whether
Square
that's
Enix would like another $30 from everybody, so
yeah, and I wonder if that's not a because Yuffie's largely unnecessary to the core Final Fantasy VII plot. Obviously, you could miss her entirely, or you're playing it anyway.
yeah.
And Vincent's exactly the same. So I'm wondering if he is the star of an integrate style thing for Rebirth.
I think the problem with doing
Because
that
it's
for
throwaway,
Vincent
you can
though
kind of
is
do what you
yeah,
want.
but the area that you locate him in is pretty integral to the original plot. So I think, I mean, as much as you had to go to Wutai to do the stuff there with, Yuffie and all of that sort of stuff, I can see how they could excise that a little bit easier than maybe the stuff with Vincent, but who
Yeah.
knows? They're doing so much with this that they could just, you know,
Yeah, the
do
whole
whatever they
Nibelheim
want,
thing could
really.
completely change at this
Yeah,
point, and probably has completely
yeah.
changed. So, yeah, it'll be kind of interesting in that respect. What about the summer 2023? Or, no, actually, did they put? No, they said
Winter
next summer. They said next.
2023, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, next. Or yeah, sorry, they're winter, but yeah,
So, well,
next
that'll
summer.
be
They didn't actually put
US.
a
Yeah,
year, so they again left that
yeah.
kind of open to end of
That's like 18
2023,
months,
beginning of
isn't it?
2024. Yeah, yeah, it's 18
Yeah.
months away.
So, I mean, that's fair. I can see them hitting that target
Yeah, I mean
pretty
it's been
easily.
more than 2 years already since remake first came out.
Yeah. So I think that's, a healthy, if they were trying to say, our summer this year or, US summer next year, I'd probably be a little bit more skeptical. But I think to say 18 months out is, probably a bit more respectable.
Yeah, I mean maybe, and you floated the possibility. I can't remember now whether it was before the show or after it, the Final Fantasy 16 date, and whether that does or doesn't stick. Like maybe what happens with Final Fantasy VII remake is a little bit dependent on what happens in terms of the timeline. Is a little bit dependent on 16 because they won't like those two are
That
the future of Final Fantasy in essence.
you don't want them
And
overlapping too much.
yeah,
And I think
exactly. If
I think
16
it's
slides for some reason, then 7 remake has to. Sorry, 7 part 2 rebirth has to slide as a result.
it depends on the tail they want to have on 16 as well. Like I think if they've got some lengthy support plans and some DLC for that, they want to give it a
Comrades
bit of breathing
multiplayer again,
room. Yeah, like give it a bit of breathing room
the
from,
fishing game,
Rebirth. I will go to the wall for a good fishing mini game. Those things are amazing.
the in VR, Monsters of the Deep, wasn't it?
I can take or leave that at the moment until we get a VR update because
Yeah,
the PSVR is a very long in the tooth at this point.
yeah, yeah.
But
It's
I can see there being a bit of a gap, and
it needs to
I
be
have
six
not
months.
followed. Yeah, I've not followed 16 anywhere near as closely as you have, so it's kind of guesswork from me at this point. But Like I could. When did you say that's due for end of this year?
No,
Winter
so
2022?
Crisis Core is the end of this year, beginning of next. Then 16 would be 6 months later, and
Ah, okay.
7 Part
So
2 would be
about
about
a
six
year.
months after that. So,
Hmm.
which is why I say,
Potentially.
like, if I think if Crisis Core slid a month or two, I don't think that bothers anything for Final Fantasy 16, because I think you're right. It's probably going to be that, whether it's 40, 50, $60 title. They'll get that out there. They'll get the sales that they want, and they
Yeah.
move on. And it's multi-plat too, so they're going to squeeze more out of it. Like, that's the, I guess that's an important one for Crisis Core, is it's coming to Xbox, Switch, as well as PlayStation and PC. So, but
Don't
if
forget
16
they'll.
slides for some reason, then Part 2 has to slide, because they get under each other's feet.
And of course, there'll be some exclusive cutscene in the Crisis Core remake that you can only get by doing
Yeah,
something
maybe.
ridiculous that'll tease something in Rebirth, and
Yeah,
maybe
it's their
they'll
way of trying to
your
keep
save
PlayStation
data
people
or
in the
carry an
family.
item over or something. I'm
Yeah,
sure they'll do something along those lines. But yeah, I guess it will really depend because how much is 16 going to mirror the sort of updated gameplay we saw in 7 Remake, which wasn't quite to the level of 15. It was that, sort of middle
it
ground,
was in
although they did
between. Yeah,
make it pretty flexible. So that could, play into it as well. How real
yeah,
time is 16?
yeah. There's a lot of 13 specifically in Seven's combat, where it's kind of in that middle ground, where it wasn't quite as free flowing and really balls to the wall like 15 kind of was, because there were some of those traditional constraints that pulled it back, and so it kind of went
Hmm.
that path, but then took the half step back and really felt a bit like 13, and it still had the staggers and those sorts of things in it as well, in that respect. So I think that was kind of where that landed, and presumably is the path that they'll continue down going forward. But yeah, I think there's a fine line that they all need to walk when it comes to these release dates, and I think if 16 slides, 7 slides, or Rebirth slides, it's just how I think this needs to work to give themselves time. And then obviously there's everything else in and around it that could happen too, with tactics, and
Hmm.
I don't think 9 will drop in anywhere around that period. But
Is 16 hitting PS4?
no, no, that's 5 and 5 only. Um,
Okay. I guess I
and
don't
so
know.
yeah, I guess going back to, you mentioned before, obviously that I'm a little bit more on the beat when it comes to 16. Like, the reason why I'm pretty bullish about even that just being it's polish and polish only is the fact that trailer has apparently been ready since the beginning of the year. Like,
Yeah.
there was a plan at some point, and presumably that might have been I think it was the February, beginning of state of play that came along. Um, they had plans at that point to air it fairly early on, and were told not to, and it became crystal clear that that was Sony that told them not to.
Which
Um,
is a, certainly a choice.
yeah, well, I mean, you're exclusive. We've paid big bucks. Maybe we've got this optical issue that people are having with state of play. So how about you hold that until, because we've got XYZ, which they obviously wouldn't declare, that was Resident Evil
Hmm.
4 and all those other things they had lined up. But to really kind of blow people away with the third parties, it means it takes the pressure off us for God of War. It takes there's all those sorts of little larger consequences that kind of affect Sony, and the optical thing for the PS5 versus the Xbox. That let's
I
hold
think,
this trailer until
yeah,
then, and especially if it wasn't going to come out this year, then what was the rush?
yeah, and I think everyone's sort of holding their breath a little bit after, the more recent Xbox and Bethesda showcase. It's
Yeah,
become pretty apparent they don't really have anything for this year, which
yeah.
isn't surprising. I always figured it was going to take Microsoft a very long time to spin up those studios, and
Did you think
you
more
know,
than 4 years though? Because that's really where it's at. Like, the
I
purchases
mean,
being in 2018, the first round of purchases. Sorry.
we really do not know. Um, what had to take place at those studios to get to the point where they were in pre-production of something that Microsoft approved of,
Yeah.
and then how they all flew during, the pandemic. How many of them were
Actually, that's a
just
very good
tools
point. The
down
pandemic does
completely?
slow it down, as they transition from one to another, to from one model to another, to one managerial model to another. So yeah, good
And
point.
obviously, some of them have come out and said that Microsoft are pretty hands-off, but I feel like any company at some point is going to become very hands-on when they need some product.
Yeah.
And Game Pass has been great for helping, Microsoft keep people busy, but yeah, eventually we are sort of starting to wonder, hey, where are all the new games that should be getting made by all of those studios that you bought?
2023 has to be the year, you'd imagine. I mean, even this is getting well off our track with the Final Fantasy conversation, but yeah, I mean, Starfield is obviously early, Redfall's early, Forza has slid into 2023. Um, uh,
Well, it
there was
all
other
sort of ties
exclusives.
in.
It's
It
Obsidian that
also,
is keeping him going at the moment. With like
oh
even
yeah.
this year, it's Grounded going 1.0, and it's damn Tom Sawyer's game, Pentiment. Like
Hmm.
that's it.
I mean, it all sort of ties into me because I can't help but think that not as much Microsoft, but definitely Sony are looking at their numbers, and we're not anywhere near a tipping point of the PlayStation 5 reaching those PlayStation 4 numbers.
Yep.
And like it's really hard to ignore 100+ million user base when you're probably sitting at 20 million at the moment.
Yeah, which is
Like
where
it's
we kind of see the God of War and Horizon scenario.
well, that's why they're on PS4 because again, like it would be ridiculous to take something like God of War or Spider-Man and all of those other games that are some of the highest selling games on the PlayStation 4 and they've sold what 20 million units?
Yeah,
That means 1 in 5 owners is purchasing that game. So if you extrapolated that to the PlayStation 5, which I would assume it's probably more like 1 in 2, given that you would expect it
yeah.
to be a more dedicated
It's the
user
hardest
base
of
right now.
hardcore early on. Yeah,
But yeah, to sell maybe half the amount of units, it just doesn't make business sense.
yeah.
And so
Which
I
I
can
guess,
imagine
yeah,
a
the
lot of
big.
these
Go on.
publishers just looking at the numbers and going, but if we hold out and there's more console sales over Christmas, and then we've got a high user base, and then we can, actually move some of these things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember there was a report only, I'm going to say about a month or so ago from Sony where they were like their sales projections for this next year for them were actually closer to really what they'd projected the year prior. Like they're of the belief, and it could be wrong, but they're of the belief that the chip shortage issues will no longer affect in the way that they were before. Whether that's just because they locked down a shipment so long ago that is now finally ready to be fulfilled. Um, and then they forecast beyond that point that the issue will become less of an issue and they'll be able to get back to business as usual once that stock has finally come through and been sold through. Remains to be seen, but yeah, maybe that's why we're starting to see Rebirth get the PS5 only title. 16, similar sort of deal. Resident Evil 4 is PS5 only, I believe. Now,
Hmm.
they did say that about Village for a long time, and I'd heard 4 or 5 months before they officially announced that it was going to get delayed that wasn't going to be the case and it was going to come to PS4. But certainly that upfront marketing was it's next gen only.
Well, that's how they
Initially,
get you to buy the console, and then if you haven't
exactly.
bought the console, you find out you can still play the game.
Yeah, surprise. Okay, we're not going to get as many sales we want, so we'll open it up to this other audience.
But I do feel like, as you've mentioned, that practice does have a cutoff point, and I'm wondering, they've said before that, God
Spider
of
Man is meant to be
War,
next gen only too, by the way.
yeah, and they've said that God of War is the last one that's coming to PS4 as well, and I think it will be really key for it to come out this year to still hit that, because I could honestly see Sony backtracking on that next year. If God of War gets pushed to next year, I could honestly see them walking back on the PS4 as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite possible. I think I'm with you though. I think it will absolutely come out this year because VR2 is lined up for Q1 next year. Again, that's unconfirmed, but a lot of reporting around that at the moment. Um, so yeah, like trying to line all these things up, which again kind of takes us back to the Final Fantasy and Square Enix side of things, like stacking all these up and working with your third-party partners and all those sort of things. It becomes a very interesting tightrope for them to all walk, and yeah, where those games kind of slide in is incredibly fascinating within the bigger picture, but also for the Final Fantasy franchise and Square Enix too.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love for all those things to come out when they projected.
6 months
I think
apart.
yeah, I think Crisis Core is a pretty solid lock. I can see that
Yeah,
happening. Um, but yeah, I could potentially see 16 slipping to what they've got for Rebirth and see Rebirth getting pushed another 6 months, which would put it into 2024, which would be a shame, but uh, it wouldn't surprise me. And then maybe what they do with part 3 is it's similar to The Last of Us Part 2,
Closes
it
the gen
comes
out.
out and closes the generation out, and then Square aren't trying to straddle two generations of consoles like they had to do with Remake Part 1.
And so one last, I guess, kind of talking point on the thing. They've announced that obviously there's a third game. They didn't that it's going to be part of a trilogy, and that's it. Well, we'll see whether that's the case. And the reason why I kind of argue with like they might close out this story, but how far they go from there, like I guess what I'm getting at is, do you feel like Final Fantasy VII is now finally, and we obviously saw Crisis Core and Dirge back in the day, we saw Advent Children, we've seen this other content, but with the remake and what's coming from that, do you feel like Final Fantasy VII now has kind of become its own franchise, similar to how Modern Warfare became the thing for Call of Duty? Like people forgot about Call of Duty and started thinking about Modern Warfare. People forgot that it was Call of Duty 4, and they just think Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And I wonder if we're gonna see a similar sort of thing here with Final Fantasy VII, where you've got the broader franchise, but within that you've got a pillar that is perhaps more powerful than the core franchise itself in Final Fantasy VII and all these titles that come out around it.
I think we're already there. I think like we're in the middle of that right now. Is this Final Fantasy VII Pro, and they tried to do it with other um entries in the franchise, like the was it
10-2,
Evilise,
13-2,
yeah, and Tactics Advance
12-2.
and Advance
Yeah.
2, and yeah, 12 had a bunch of spin-off games. Some
Yeah,
weird
Revenant
ones on the DS,
Wings. Yeah.
things like that. Yeah, like they've tried this before and to varying degrees of success, and I think seven being, for better or worse, the iconic Final Fantasy game these days. I think we're already in the middle of that. If we're getting a remake of Crisis Core and we're getting two more parts of the 7 remake and no doubt a few other things alongside that, then yeah, I would say that it already is basically like its World of Final Fantasy VII spin-off franchise with,
That's fair.
you know, how many different games would be in it now if you wanted to count them all individually? Like, we're probably getting close to 10.
Yeah. No. Oh, jeez. I mean, there was four four games alone in that one showcase that went for 12 minutes
Yeah.
or whatever.
And then if we're counting all the mobile games and other things and where they've made significant appearances, like, the PS1 fighting game that they did that had Cloud in it and,
Oh yeah.
Cloud
Hell,
popping
even
up in
Chocobo
Kingdom
Racing
Hearts.
really is
Hmm.
stemming
Yeah,
from,
it's
yeah.
it's from Final Fantasy VII, and they've done two of those games, so I think it's safe to say that Final Fantasy VII is kind of its own spin-off franchise under the larger Final Fantasy
Yeah, I just
umbrella.
wonder if it's going to get to that point, if it's not already, where it's actually just greater than the core Final Fantasy franchise. Like people looking forward more to the next Final Fantasy VII related title than they are Final Fantasy 17 or 18 or whatever.
I don't think we'll ever get to that point because I think what the Final Fantasy franchise is built on, one of its strengths compared to a lot of other JRPG franchises, is its willingness to change and
Wipe the slate clean.
adapt.
Here's a new story.
Yeah, and similar elements and themes and other things, but something that makes it feel different to prior entries. You know, as opposed to say something like Dragon Quest, which if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, yes, they're all very different games, but they are very traditionalist and they're like a warm blanket on a cold winter's day. It's, nothing necessarily revolutionary, but very familiar. Whereas I think Final Fantasy is trying to, or always has tried to do something, fairly different and bold and push um I won't say the genre because I feel like they stopped trying to really push the genre a little while back.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Um,
Um
I guess like the thing that's interesting. This is more the sales side, so I'm thinking Square looking at bottom lines and those sorts of things. 15 has only sold 10 million copies, and that was announced earlier this year. So the most, like it's, I say only, like 10 million is an incredible number, but I guess in this kind of modern landscape, while I think 7 is already there.
but it's
So I wonder if it's not.
key to remember that that is not a disappointment
No,
because
no.
that is an Japan-based Square studio, not a
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to.
Western-based
Yeah, I didn't
Square.
mean to. It's kind of in that sense of like how Square
It's
perceives it,
not a
because we know that
disappointment,
Square's
Paul.
optics and the way they look at their bottom line is
It's not
ridiculous.
Tomb Raider level. It's
Yeah,
so it only
Tomb
took it
Raider has
seven
sold more
years.
than those titles, and yet,
It only took 7 years and a re-release to get there. Well done, Final Fantasy 15. Again, I feel like uh, that game
Which is why I
is
just it's more that kind of bottom line financial sales thing is why I think that maybe there is more grounds for them to go let's really tilt into this because there's something about seven compared to
well,
the
and again,
rest.
well, it's a pre-sold property, and I think that's also the risk they run. Every time they give us a brand new story with a brand new set of characters, it's taking a gamble that it's going to grab people in the same way that the previous games did.
Yeah,
And clearly, there's something about that seven storyline that resonates much more strongly for players than maybe 15 did.
yeah,
And again, we've already talked about I don't know if Final Fantasy is translating to a younger generation of JRPG fans because it's it's not as hip as Persona. It's, not as cool as some of these other, JRPGs that
it's
are out
far
there
cooler than
at the
Persona.
moment.
But anyway, we'll pass on
But I mean,
that.
it's kind of true. Like
No,
you
there's
know,
the marketplace has changed a lot.
and I think that probably ties into it a little bit. Um, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this, proposed remake of Nine goes and whether they,
Goat.
yeah. But and even then, it's like I don't have the
I
sales
actually
figures on me, but
I do
do
actually
you?
wonder why. Like as much as I love it, I'm wondering like trying to think about Square Enix. Like, why have you picked this one
Well, because what were
now?
the sales numbers on that compared to Seven? Like that,
Poor
that's
because it came at the
some,
end of the generation, was
yeah.
usurped by 10 very fast, and of course
Mm.
it was at the tail end of the PS1 where piracy was rife.
Oh
So
yes.
it's actually one of the poorer selling titles, despite being the best one. It's one of the poorer selling titles. Hell, I didn't
Well,
even buy it for a long time. I actually like because I mean we remember what things were like back in the day. It took an eternity for a game that came out in the US to even make its way over here. So I got my hands on a burnt copy and I played that and finished it before 9 even came out.
and and again, I think it was towards that, like you said, the tail end of that generation where it was very difficult to bring yourself to pay $90 for a PlayStation 1 game. Because I don't know about you, but my own experience was that I picked up Final Fantasy VII as a platinum release. It had already gone
Yeah,
platinum by the time I got a PlayStation 1 console because I needed to
yeah, that
wait
was the
for
same for
them to
us.
drop to around $200 before I could get one. My
Yeah,
parents
because
were
the
not
platinum one came
splashing
with a
out.
demo for 8, didn't it?
Yeah, so you had the
Yeah,
demo
that's
disc for
how I
eight. That
got it.
was the
Yeah,
version I had, and it was $40. And I bought Final Fantasy VIII, and I got the Black Label copy because it was just about to go platinum, and they were clearing out old stock. So it was $40 to be replaced with the platinum version. But I think it took Nine, and obviously this is, as you said, poor sales compounding this problem. It took Nine a very long time to go platinum,
yeah,
and and even by the time it did,
and
I
all
think it
very
was
legitimate reasons, of course. But
yeah.
yeah,
But it was, 50, $60. And, when you're picking that up, and I got it well after the fact. I'm sure the PlayStation 2 was out and, the Bouncer and some
yeah,
other games were on next to this sad old copy of Final Fantasy IX that had, just recently gone platinum and had dropped to $50. And that's when I picked it up.
yeah. Yeah, it's
But
it's
it,
it's a tricky line that they're walking at the moment with all this stuff.
I think, I think you will understand the reasons why they're probably remaking it more than anybody else. And it's because it is the last Final Fantasy that I think embodies the spirit of the series, the original spirit of the series in many
Yeah,
ways.
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I'm still shocked that that is where they're going at the moment. With all that demand for six, like presumably six is going to get the 2D HD or HD 2D, whatever they call it, treatment at this point. I feel like that's
I
got to be the path they go down. But
I feel like
I
it's
feel
a
for the
bridge too
longest time I thought
far.
six was had to be first, but apparently
I
not.
think it's a bridge too far to bring those games back. I think it's very difficult to translate something from a 16-bit console into a fully 3D world and
Yeah, I
do it
suppose we don't.
justice.
Yeah, we don't have our Well, again, no, that's where I think they get the HD 2D, so it's more
Yeah.
or less a remake. But we don't have the evidence of how successful that is because we're still currently waiting on Live Alive as the most the upcoming one that kind of fits that bill, which obviously was pretty niche and not well known back in the day. And I guess the most pronounced of all the titles that we know that are getting that treatment is Dragon Quest 3, and that's still TBD. So we don't really
Yeah.
have this evidence before us yet that kind of shows that this is a good pathway when you're bringing back the classics. It's all well and good for Octopath Traveler and oh shit, I've just gone blank. Triangle Strategy
Yeah.
when they're a new
Bravely
title.
Default, all those sorts of things where it's very
But
much leaning on
yeah,
the nostalgia of, players from yesteryear.
But when
And
you're
I have to
actually
imagine
trying
that,
to channel it
yeah.
100% because you're remaking the game, that's a whole other kettle of fish. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
And that audience is shrinking year on year. Like,
Yeah,
I can't
people,
imagine
parents dying out.
15-year-olds
That's
are really, yeah, I can't imagine there's many 15-year-olds really excited to, wow, this remake of Final Fantasy VI.
but give it to us anyway.
Probably not.
You're right, but give it to
Yeah.
us anyway.
But it'll
Speak
be
to us,
interesting.
50,000 people that are left. We'll buy it. All of us will.
Yeah, well, I guess, isn't it funny that how many times have you bought the same Final Fantasy games over again? Too many is the answer, Paul. Too many.
Look, I've still only bought 9 once. That was Black Label on the PS1. 7 though.
Did
Oh
you
no,
get
actually
a
no. Sorry,
code for 9
no. I got the
Remastered?
digital. No, I got the digital one on PSN, of course.
Yeah, I was
'cause
going to
wanted
say.
trophy chasing,
Oh, yes.
which I've got the wonderful skipping rope one, for jumping that skipping rope 1,000 times.
I don't know. I would need to give you my Switch to get that for me because I don't know how you have the patience to do that.
I've already admitted this on Patched. I used remote play and then had a bot do the work for me.
Oh, my Lord. Of course you did. Well, in that case, I will not give you kudos for that, Paul.
Yeah. No, I don't. I knew that like if I didn't say anything now, someone in the audience would because I've already admitted it previously on the
That's
show.
a true sign of addiction there, Paul.
Because I want to get that Final Fantasy IX Platinum. And that was always going to be the one that got in the way.
Whatever it takes.
I've ticked
At
that
whatever
box, and
cost.
now I can go and play the game the rest of the way legit.
No matter how much you have to debase yourself to get it.
Yeah. So next step, I do the whole lightning thing from Final Fantasy X. I'll just use a bot for
God,
that.
I've forgotten about that.
I don't think that one works as well from what I can gather, but anyway. Well, I reckon we wrap things up there. We were talking half an hour for this thing. We managed to go for 50 plus minutes about Final Fantasy VII and 16 and Xbox and a million different paths that all somehow still come together in a really fascinating whole, and it'll be really interesting to see how things play out. Thanks for coming aboard, mate.
No worries. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about the game series that really needs a remake, and that's Dark Cloud. So, level 5, if you're out there.
Yeah,
please.
I can't even laugh that one off. I'd totally be into that.
Just a HD remake of Dark Chronicle. Dark Cloud 2 for you US listeners.
US folk. Oh, yeah, I could get right around. And that art style on Chronicle is exceptional. Still holds up incredibly well in that respect. I love looking at that game.
But I'll just make do
when it comes back.
I'll make do with Final Fantasy and Persona and all these other games. But I'll be thinking of Dark Chronicle.
Yeah, as you should. We'll wrap things up there. If you enjoyed this episode of Patch, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. All the buttons down below. Hit the notification bell. That way you're alerted to every new video the moment it goes live on the channel. That includes more Patched, Player 2 Plays, Gamer School, and a whole bunch more. Awesome stuff. Please subscribe and go and check it out. Visit the website, player2.net.au, for reviews, previews, opinion pieces, news, features, links to the podcast series, Patched, the Player 2 Pixelcast, and Dev Diary. We're on Patreon, patreon.com/player2au. Kicking a few bucks, lower tiers early access, higher tiers monthly episode exclusives. And finally, Twitter. Stephen?
Gorath 44,000. And
Right
if you
above
like
his head
board
in the
games, no shelf control, but that's a little bit more niche.
Paul James Games for myself. The website is player2au. And again, mate, thanks for coming on and talking Final Fantasy VII, the future of Final Fantasy VII with me.
No worries.
Matto, I hope you enjoyed the book that you were reading tonight. Look forward to seeing you again next week. As we've discussed, he's just not a Final Fantasy guy. He said, look, at one point, I can sit there and read a book the whole time you chat if you want. I'm like, I'll spare you that.
Again, I can commiserate. I too went through a period of getting off the Final Fantasy wagon.
He was never on. Just because he's never been on it. So it would have been even harder for him. So yeah, we'll see you next week, mate. And Stephen, yeah, thanks again.
No worries.
Everyone else, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for watching.